All right, let's get right into it. We're about to explore one of the most powerful stories the Bible doesn't actually tell. A story about a woman who was banished, demonized, and practically erased from history. We're talking about Lilith.
Just think about that for a second. What if Eve wasn't the first? It's a question that completely flips what we think we know about the Garden of Eden, and it opens a door to a much older and frankly, much wilder version of the creation story.
Okay, so before we go any further, let's get one thing straight right up front. The hard, canonical evidence for Lilith, it's incredibly slim. This is a story that has always lived in the margins, in folklore, in mystical texts, and really in the questions that the official version just doesn't answer. But that's exactly what makes her so fascinating. The fact that a story so intentionally buried could still survive, well, that tells you something powerful is going on.
So where does this whole idea even come from? Well, it all starts with a little puzzle, a kind of ghost in the machine, right there in the book of Genesis itself.
So check this out. If you read the book of Genesis really carefully, you'll see there are actually two different and kind of contradictory stories about creation right next to each other. In Genesis chapter 1, it says God created humanity together, quote, male and female he created them, simple, equal, at the same time. But then you get to chapter 2 and the story changes. Suddenly, Adam is made first from dust, and Eve comes later from his rib to be his helper.
And you better believe people noticed this. For centuries, scholars and mystics looked at this and went, wait a minute. If Eve is the woman from the rib in story number 2, who was the woman from story number 1, the one made as an equal? See, that contradiction, that biblical plot hole, created a space, and an older story came rushing back in to fill it. The story of Lilith.
And that question takes us right to the heart of this myth. We're talking about creation's very first rebellion, and it stars Adam's equal, not his subordinate.
So, according to the folklore that grew around this idea, that first woman was Lilith. And here's the absolute key. She wasn't made from Adam's rib. She was formed from the very same earth, the same clay, at the exact same time. From their first breath, they were equals. Period.
And this is where it all kicks off. The myth says that when Adam tried to assert his dominance over her, Lilith just refused. Her argument was simple, it was powerful, and it was revolutionary for its time. She just said, "We are equal, for we both come from the earth." Yeah, this wasn't just some minor squabble. This was a complete and total rejection of a hierarchy she never agreed to. The conflict escalates, she refuses to submit, and then she does something absolutely shocking. She utters the sacred, secret name of God, which grants her the power to fly, and she leaves. She leaves Adam, she leaves Eden, she leaves the whole deal behind. She chose exile over being subservient.
And the story doesn't end there. God sends 3 angels to drag her back. They find her by the Red Sea and give her an ultimatum: come back or face a terrible curse. But Lilith, she doesn't budge. She accepts the horrifying punishment that 100 of her children would die every single day rather than return to a life of submission in the garden.
So you have to ask, how does a figure of fierce independence get turned into a child-stealing night demon? Well, it happens through a very effective smear campaign, a total character assassination. Let's break down how this rebel was rewritten.
It didn't happen overnight. First, her story was deliberately merged with much older, scarier figures from Mesopotamia, the Lilith, who were these feared spirits of the night. Then around the 9th century, a text finally writes it all down, cementing her as Adam's rebellious first wife. And by the Middle Ages, in mystical texts, the transformation is complete. She's now the queen of demons, paired up with the fallen angel Samael.
And what this whole rewrite does is create this perfect, stark contrast for everyone to see. On one side, you've got Lilith, the independent, rebellious equal. On the other side, you get her replacement, Eve, the obedient helper, literally created from man for man.
And let's be real, this served a very specific purpose. The demonization of Lilith wasn't random. Her story was twisted into a cautionary tale. It was a way to bury a powerful example of female autonomy and replace it with a model that propped up the dominant social and religious order. But what is so fascinating is that this archetype, this idea of a wild, untamed feminine power, it isn't just Lilith's story. You start looking around and you see echoes of her in cultures all over the ancient world.
And this shows a really profound split in how cultures handled this kind of energy. In the West, with Lilith, this raw, primal power was seen as demonic. It was a threat to order, something to be feared and cursed.
But you look to the east, at a figure like the Hindu goddess Kali, and that same kind of fierce energy is worshipped. It's seen as a divine, necessary part of the cosmos. Where the West saw chaos as a problem, the East saw chaos and creation as two sides of the same coin. And her story is so rich, it's been interpreted in tons of other ways. Gnostic traditions saw her as a messenger of divine wisdom. Some modern theories even cast her as an alien genetic prototype who was just too powerful to be controlled. And you can look at ancient artifacts, like the famous Burney relief, and see this powerful winged goddess. And it's hard not to wonder if you're looking at the original face of Lilith.
Which brings us all the way to today, because after spending thousands of years in the shadows, Lilith is making a massive comeback into our collective consciousness. You could call it the return of the repressed.
Probably the most common place you'll hear her name now is in astrology, with Black Moon Lilith. Now, it's not a planet or a star you can see. It's a mathematical point, the furthest point in the moon's orbit from the Earth. And what it represents in a birth chart is, well, it's perfect. It's our raw, untamed self, our hidden power, our autonomy, and all the truths we've been taught to repress.
And this isn't just some niche astrological thing either. Her presence in pop culture, we're talking music, art, books, spirituality, it has absolutely exploded, especially over the last couple of decades. She is an icon whose time, it seems, has finally come back around.
So after centuries of being the villain, Lilith has been reclaimed. Today, she's become this powerful symbol for anyone who's ever felt like an outcast. She stands for sovereignty, for taking back your own power, and for the fundamental freedom to say no and refuse to submit.
So I'll just leave you with this to think about. This is a story with almost no official record, a story that people actively tried to erase for thousands of years. And yet, it survived. So the question is, why now? Why do you think this specific archetype, the woman who would not bow, is returning with such undeniable force in our world today?